Yeah, it did. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Adam Green, who I've spoken to once before on Keith Woods' channel. I really enjoyed that conversation. Adam is a very well-informed person on religious matters. We talked more about the history of religion and the texts involved. Today, I'd like to talk with Adam about his views on God generally, his opinion on atheism, agnosticism, pantheism, and things of that nature. So, to start with, you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure, Eric. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm Adam Green. I've been posting videos for 10 years now at No More News, and I do a news stream on religion and politics and deep dives on origins of religion and exposing Judaism and rabbis, Kabbalah. I do internet documentaries. And thanks for having me to discuss. I usually don't talk about I've never done a video about atheism or about God even. It's so this will be an interesting talk.
Yeah. So, where are you coming from on that question? Do you consider yourself agnostic? Would you call yourself an atheist? Or
Uh, Kind of a blend, agnostic atheist, kind of leaning atheist, not a militant atheist. And I was raised Protestant Christian. Never really believed the Bible stuff and dying for your sins and going to heaven. Didn't really believe all of that, but I did believe. I was instilled the fear of the Lord. I was fear of God, fear of hell and Satan. But once I became to get like 16, graduating high school, that's when YouTube came around, and then I was always really interested in learning about evolution or religious debates. That was like the when the horsemen of atheism got real popular, new atheism with Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and all those other guys. So they kind of helped me. And I used to watch, actually, you may be familiar with Matt Dillahunty from the Atheist Experience. A long, long time ago, like over 10 years ago, I was watching both their podcasts and Alex Jones. So kind of getting, a total contrast of different perspectives uh, with the iTunes and podcasts in my ear. And ever since then, I don't believe in creationism. I believe um, most likely that there's no God, there's no deity, there's no creator. But at the same time, I don't completely rule it out because, we haven't figured everything out yet. There's lots of unanswered questions. And, the whole known universe could just be a tiny little atom in a whole nother big universe. So I don't know. I just don't rule out the idea of some type of higher power that we don't understand.
sure, yeah, I was coming from a similar place around 2011. From 2008 to like 2011, I consider myself an atheist, materialist. And then I just started getting further into philosophy and the idea of a ground ontologically for your worldview became more pressing. So I think the best way to approach judgments about the foundation of your worldview is in terms of like holistic comparisons of available worldviews. I tried to express this idea a little bit in our discussion then, but it's like you have to work on some kind of model of the world in the first place. Everyone has a worldview, whether they acknowledge it or not. So we can't really operate from a place of perpetual suspension of belief. We have to find the best theory that accounts for the most of what we see and then just kind of work forward with it. So, on that basis, the idea that there is some kind of foundation to things is appealing to me just because we see that in our experience, there are things that are more particular and then things that are more universal. So, numbers are more universal than any particular object, and then a concept like unity or even beauty might be more fundamental than particular numbers. So it looks like there's this hierarchy within reality of complex contingent things leading back to simpler and simpler more universal things. So if you just continue that, it seems to point to the idea that there's one simplest, most universal foundation to the whole thing. So what do you think of that idea?
I think it's interesting. When you said more complex things, built on simpler things, I immediately thought of evolution because that's how I see the complexity coming about from evolution. But taking it all the way back to some like first mover type of thing, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that it's got me convinced. I would need to see more evidence and explaining on how you got there.
Do you agree with what's called, Platonic realism in mathematics? Do you think that numbers are real things, or are they just kind of tools and labels that we invent? What's your stance on that, or universals more generally?
Mhm. I think for sure numbers are a real thing that that we notice. Like we're describing a real thing in the world. But is this like a abstract concept that's like outside of our minds and like a written rule by law by God in the universe? I don't think so. I just think it's a natural. If you're gonna have a universe filled with things, then you're gonna be like, how many galaxies are there? There's always gonna be a number to count. But that's basically the transcendental argument I hear from the ortho bros all the time, that objective truth or numbers exist or language exists, thus God must be exist. But I'm just not convinced even the slightest bit by that for proof of God. And if that's like the best proof that we can come up with for a God, then I'd say that the evidence is very, very, very slim when that's the best that you got. I don't believe in a
Sure,
God.
yeah.
Hold on. I don't believe in a God that would like have to have us try to discover him or
Okay, I
try
think
to
Adam is
explain him.
lagging
Like
a
if there
little
really was a
bit.
deity. Oh, am I?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, am
You
I
might
back
have
now?
to go without the webcam, possibly. But yeah, so it's not necessarily the most compelling on its own, but just kind of digging deeper into that question, if numbers have an existence, they have an existence somewhere. There's some way in which they exist. So the typical argument I've seen from ortho bros, I think, is pretty good, which is that, okay, we know that numbers can subsist in a mind. Numbers seem to be the foundation of a lot of physical things. Like the most accurate description we can give of physical reality boils down to equations. So reality is bound up with the way numbers are. Um, Therefore, they have to subsist somewhere. They subsist in something analogous to what subsists the way they subsist in our mind. It's basically like if they don't exist in a mind, what else could they exist in? So, what do you think about that? Like, where else could numbers or the laws of nature be situated if not something that holds them together
Mhm.
and orders them? It's like
Well, I don't think they're
otherwise,
situated anywhere.
sure.
That's the thing. I don't think they have to be situated anywhere. It's just like an inevitable. If there is existence of things, it's inevitable. There's gonna be like numbers of those things. But like, does it have to be encapsulated in some type of like higher mind? I don't see that. Like, just think, imagine hypothetically there is no God in this world. Well, we do definitely still, the universe still exists. We exist. Numbers still exist. So,
The thing about
hypothetically,
numbers
we
and
could have all those
mathematical
things without a God.
But the thing about numbers and mathematical
Mm,
truth is that they interrelate. So what's true of one element of mathematics influences all the other elements of mathematics, or like abstract propositions that are true mutually entail one another and describe one another in a way that you can't just have all of these things existing separately in the way that bodies do. Bodies can be fundamentally extended in space and not contacting and influencing one another, it seems. But numbers mutually entail, like the number three involves the number one, and facts about numbers have implications, so they seem to be holistically related in this way where all mathematical truth is just there, ready to go. All of the entailments are together, bundled together, just like, if you're talking with a person, they have a holistic worldview where all of the facts that from their experience go together in their mind. You can ask questions of that person and get answers. And we can interface with math and the laws of nature in a kind of similar way because they're all related. So saying that they just kind of spill out of necessity of any physical universe, I think has the causation in the wrong direction too. It's like, I don't think a universe is conceivable without first conceiving of that kind of logos element, the laws of nature, the numbers, quantity, position, etc., all of those kind of metaphysical categories, which are complex and interrelated, and propositions about one of them involves propositions about others of them. So any thought of a world already involves all of this kind of bundled together, holistically related abstract propositions, abstract law, abstract mathematics, and the only way we understand how those things subsist are in a mind. So the idea is that there's something not extended and not bodily that allows extended bodily existence to subsist. And that whatever that is something that we can tap into no matter where you are in the universe. All of math is available to you. Like, you can tap into this realm of universals and deal with real stuff about reality. Like, you can apply it to engineering, you can bring it back to experience, and it interfaces with the world. So it's causally potent. It's not nothing. And yet it's everywhere and nowhere. It's integrated. So what do you think about that? Where is math?
I think it's well, I think it's just a natural phenomena. Excuse me. It's a natural phenomena of existence in the universe, but it's not dependent on having a higher mind to be there. Math has always been out there, but we're still today just discovering the laws of mathematics. And it's interesting, 2000 plus years ago when the Bible was written, they weren't aware of any of these mathematic things. I shouldn't say any of them. They had, some of the more basic mathematic mathematics discovered at that time, but we're still learning stuff today. There could be huge things in math that people haven't discovered yet still. And but still, like, this, all of this could exist. It would still be the same, assuming that there was no God. There still could be these things, because if there's not any other proof besides that there's transcendentals and language and Plato's forms or these metaphysical things, like, you can't just point to metaphysical things and go, well, those wouldn't exist without a God, and have that be your only proof is God. I see that as the problem.
Sure. Yeah. I'm coming from the perspective of we have to have a theory of all these things. So the best theory of math that I can come up with is that mathematical truth, all
You
true
pause.
propositions subsist together somewhere, and the only kind of substrate I know that can do that is mental. Another way of putting it is in Platonic terms, where we have sensible experiences and then intelligible experiences. So mathematicals are intelligible, obviously, like what we experience with our bodily senses is sensory. Intelligible things are in the mental sphere. For us, we know them mentally. Their subsistence is mental or related to the mental. Just like, okay, so the physical sense organ can interact with the physical object. Hence, physical sense has something in common with bodily objects. And so our mental epistemological faculties for ascertaining mathematical truth, maybe moral truth, and things like that, has something in common with its objects of cognition. So there's something mental about these intelligibles, like the mathematicals. And so the only way we know them is mental. Therefore, maybe they subsist in a fashion analogous to our minds, maybe at a higher level and not quite the same as our minds. but
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
assumptive.
Maybe they do, but if the Earth was destroyed, it got, destroyed by a black hole or a giant star or something, or asteroid or a plague, every human brain was erased from Earth, right? All of the laws of math would still exist, right? Even if the Earth didn't exist. So if it exists just like as a natural law outside of our mind, then why does it require to have to be in a God's mind? And if the math wouldn't exist in our minds without a physical mind, right? Then how come it doesn't have to be in a physical mind of God? The God mind would be everything. I just think it's a huge stretch. And again, like if this is it, I get the vibe that like God's up in heaven and he's hiding and he makes it look like he doesn't exist in a lot of ways, but he wants you to like figure it out. You got to figure it out for yourself. We need guys like, philosophers online to explain that God exists and that he's like, "Oh, you're getting closer. You figured out transcendentals. You're getting closer to knowing my true essence." Like I just
I think
I
most
find that
cultures through
unrealistic.
history
Yeah.
have taken it for granted that nature is alive and there's intelligence behind the forces of nature. So the intuition that divine forces govern the world is pretty much ubiquitous. A handful of cultures have ever contemplated the absence of those divine forces. Um, let's do one more point on this argument, and then we can move on to other arguments because that's not the only one. It is the one that most people are familiar with, and I think it is a good one. But so if the universe, or rather the Earth, was destroyed, there are no physical brains there. The laws of mathematics still exist. Why do they have to exist in God's mind? The issue is the way that mathematical things subsist. It's not the same as the way physical things subsist. Like my water bottle is composed of atoms and molecules that are separated in space. All of the various parts aren't mutually entailing and in contact in the way that intelligible things have that property. So, like, math is, in a way, a kind of fractal whole where each part connects to every other part in a way that's not extended in space. So, if all we have is nature, which is body extended in space, and then we have these mathematicals to explain nature, physical reality isn't the right kind of thing to host things that are impartible and unitive and holistic. So it's just not according to the nature of body. So you can't explain the existence of mathematicals through the existence of body. In fact, you can only do it in the other way. Like you can explain bodily properties through numericity. In fact, that's how we define like geometric shapes in the first place. And the Pythagoreans had this kind of hierarchy of different mathematical sciences. Arithmetic was first because it's simplest and all subsequent mathematics depends on it. But by the time you get to bodily extended reality, you've already bought impartible, holistic mathematical things having some kind of subsistence. So they seem to be prior to what we would call nature. So if it's prior to nature, you could say it's like an undifferentiated field, like a physical field, in the way that in quantum mechanics or the standard model, we have these undifferentiated fields which contain like gravity, electromagnetism, etc. You could say it's not personal, but there's something beyond the physical, strictly speaking, that has to act as the substrate for math, again, because mathematical things aren't like bodily things. They're not extended through space. They just have a different character. Okay. I think you're muted. You might be muted.
Sorry, yeah, I muted on accident. So you said you see intelligence in the world. I could see why people would say that they, notice intelligence, but when I think of evolution, I don't think of intelligent design. I think of like a blind, unguided, uh, random mutations, and the better the survival for your for a species environment, more likely to reproduce. It's not like an intelligent thing. It's not like there's God going, well, this little amphibian, I'm gonna make you smarter by giving you hands so you can walk on the earth and eventually become humans. It's an unguided thing by chance, but chance with survival of the fittest. So I don't see it as like a, and if there was an intelligent created the world, I would see a lot more intelligence. I don't think we would have a period, once a month. I don't think women would be dying so often in childbirth. I don't think we'd have, you know, cancers and animals forced to eat other animals to survive. And I don't think most of the planet would be completely uh, inhospitable to life. I don't think most of the water would be salt, and so we can't drink. So all Earth is a it's like a Garden of Eden in the vacuum of the universe where we couldn't live anywhere else. We're just a tiny little speck in the known universe where we could survive, but we can't go anywhere else. So, like, if there was intelligent design, I feel like there would be way more intelligence. And if there really was a God, we wouldn't be having debates on if he was real or not. He would make himself clear. It would be no question. There wouldn't be thousands of different religions disputing on what God says and what God wants and what God has done.
Okay, I would like to postpone the problem of evil, which is a valid contention that you can have against theism. But first, we have to isolate what we're talking about by the term God. If we think it's a person that is benevolent and caring about human beings in particular, then yeah, we'll expect the world to look a certain way. Or if God maybe is more like the Pythagoreans envisioned the first principles, more like a kind of divine oneness that
Mhm.
maybe contains personality in a way that a seed contains the eventual tree that will grow out of it. It causally contains
But
personality,
trees
but
don't
isn't
have
a
personality.
person.
What do you mean by personality, though? Because a tree having personality.
I was giving an analogy. So the
Okay.
one may have personality in the same way that a seed contains the tree, not fully expressed, but the roots of the tree, so to speak, are in the seed,
Mhm.
and so the roots of personality are in the one, perhaps, but it isn't necessarily a person. That's one view you can have. Um, but yeah, I think we should sort that out first. And you mentioned if intelligence were shaping the evolution of life, uh, it would look different from how it is. And what we have is randomness and selection, survival of the fittest. I think that too only makes sense within the
Mhm.
context where there's this whole nomology or law like framework that uh, were taken for granted when we describe the process. Like all of those laws of nature, the way that creatures reproduce, the way that genes can encode information, like all of that had to be baked into the structure of reality, the law like structure of reality in the first place in order to get evolution off the ground. Like if you just had a random sea of particles interacting, you wouldn't have evolution. You need a very particular kind of context with particular natural laws in order to get evolution going. So I guess we'll go from here to the fine tuning argument,
Mhm.
which I think is a good argument, um, which is basically that the physical constants are very finely tuned to allow for a universe in which evolution could take place. If you changed any of them, like the force of gravity, just a tiny fraction of a percent, then life would not be possible, etc.
Mhm.
So, why do we find ourselves in a world where evolution was able to take place in the first place? Because I don't think we should take for granted all of those laws that are there. The context is there, the kind of phase space is laid out, the realm of possible paths evolution could take is there baked
Mhm.
into the laws. And sure, evolution involves some kind of randomness, perhaps, but like all of that law building work took place somehow or other. It maybe it's natural, but why do we have the universe that allows it to happen in the first place?
Mhm.
So that's the fine tuning
Sure,
argument.
sure. Yeah, my thoughts on that. It's like if if you buy a lottery ticket and you just buy one lottery ticket, you go to one, for one lottery, and then you get every single number right. Would you say that you fine tuned those numbers, or if there's trillions of galaxies, trillions of planets, infinite time? trillions of years, then most of all of them, there's no evolution. There's no life. There's no evolution. It's completely, nobody in the Goldilocks zone. Nobody had the right time before the planet was destroyed to have evolution, to, see the complexity that we have here on Earth. But if there's trillions and trillions of times of rolling the dice of possibilities where there could be evolution in life, like we're here, we're there. It could have happened other places in the universe we don't know about, but when you look everywhere else and appears there's no life, but we're the only one, it's like we just won the lottery, basically, is the way I see it. We're not the our world wasn't fine-tuned by God to be the place that was lived. It's just it wasn't the place that by life to exist. We wouldn't be here to even be talking about it. So that's kind of my
Yeah.
analogy. What goes on in my mind when I think of the fine-tuning.
So that was my response to fine tuning back in like 2010, probably.
Cool. I guess I'm on the right path then.
Well, I don't
So,
know.
so what changed your
I think
mind then?
it's a good response, but
Uh-huh.
I think the consequences lead back to God anyway, actually. But so first of all, I think that works if you posit the real existence of a multiverse. There are many different universes with different physical laws. We're in the one that could harbor life because where else would we find ourselves? Which
Mm.
I think is a valid argument if you're really postulating at the same time, yes, there is this multiverse. So
Mm. Well, it
if
doesn't
you
even
want
have
that
to be a
argument, I think you have to
multiverse.
buy
It
the
could just be
multiverse way.
one universe, and still, like, you know, you're not going to see life evolving on like Pluto or Mercury, right? Just because the environment is inhospitable to it. So it could be multiverses where different laws, totally different laws of physics. They don't even know really if that's possible. That's still theoretical. But how does that get you to God though? Just because it happened to happen here.
Well, because if you start going that way, um, so for the sake of argument, I guess we'll just see there is either an infinite universe where laws vary. That's why we have the fine-tuned laws that we do. Because otherwise, you have to explain where do the laws come from. Now, you can have a random number generator that just spits out infinitely many sets of random numbers that
Mhm.
constitute the laws, and that works. But that will also give you like all this possibility actualized in various either places within one big world or various worlds. Um, so if you're saying that, then the realm of what takes place in your ontology grows very big. And arguments from modern philosophers like Nick Bostrom do become relevant. The simulation argument. Um, so if you think that all of those possible things are just kind of spat out, because again, otherwise we have to explain where the laws come from and why they are what they are. If they're random and there is a superabundance of them, then the many worlds interpretation becomes kind of inevitable because, why does one particular path get chosen rather than others? We already have this infinite set of possible universes in order to explain the specific laws we have. So you're going to have like basically anything that could happen has to happen under that logic. That big of a universe, just the scope of it, every possible event is going to happen. What do you think about that step? Because it is a necessary step in the argument. Like any
Froze a little bit.
conceivable possible physical event will happen in a universe like the one we're
Mhm.
describing.
Yeah, that's like saying if there's infinite time and infinite space, like we've lived our life before, but like in a multiverse way. If it's goes
Yeah,
on forever, infinitely, then every possibility would have had to happen. Um,
sure.
I noticed you said like we're trying to explain where these laws come from, the laws of the universe. We're trying to explain where the universe itself comes from, right? So but then you go, well, it had to be a god to create those things. But then I would just say, well, then, where did that God come from? If everything has to have an explanation on where it came from or who created it, then what you're doing is you're just stopping and making a special rule for God, saying, okay, we'll just call it God. That's the first mover. And we don't have to explain where that comes. So it's like you're creating a rule and then you're breaking the rule to explain the rule. So it's like
I get
it's
how
the
it could
old
look like
question.
that.
I'm
I'm
sure the
not.
chat will be like, well, where did God come from? But like that is the problem that I see. If God doesn't need a creator to create it, then why does the universe have to have a creator? It could just exist eternally for all time, just like people propose God does.
Right. So I'm not trying to suggest that you have to posit something outside of the theoretical framework. I think there has to be an element within the theoretical framework or worldview that takes that role of organizing how law evolves, or rather is like pluralized and applied. How does law form? We need an explanation of like uh, nomanogenesis, I guess. How do laws take place? And I would go with a kind of Pythagorean explanation where above all other levels of law, there is the fact of unity to even have like conceptual coherence of any particular theoretical entity we want to suggest. So gravity, before it has the particular attractive quality that it has, the particular magnitude of its force, it is a concept. Any one concept participates of unity before it participates of any other characteristic. So again, going back to this Platonic hierarchy of forms, there does seem to be one most general thing that metaphysically everything else depends on. So
Mhm.
it is independent of contingent things, and contingent things are dependent on it. And we can just call that the one without giving it like a personalistic name. I do think personalistic theism has a role, and I think something very like the God that most Christians believe in is a reality. But I think multiple steps are necessary to get to there. And I don't think that's necessarily the same entity per se as the one. In Hinduism, this is like the distinction between Brahman, which is like this oneness, this most general metaphysical category that everything else depends on, and then Ishvara, which is like the divine intelligence. So I think most Christians worship something like that divine intelligence. That's also, in a way, Aristotle's theory of the first mover and thought thinking itself. Plato goes beyond intelligibility to this oneness beyond being. Aristotle, his highest principle is basically intellect itself. But I was actually trying to get to the idea of intellect itself through the many worlds. So if we're accepting, just to go back to that, because I think we can get somewhere maybe, but uh, so if we have this huge possibility space and anything that can happen happens, then just think about the ways in which intelligence could develop from here. Like, say, AI takes off, computing gets much more massive, we successfully network human brains together. Like, just the scale of how vast computational power could be, how how high does intelligence go if the possibility space is just unlimited? Because even as it is with this one universe, without positing a multiverse, I think Nick Bostrom's argument may actually work, that it becomes more likely that we're in some kind of simulation, just because what's more likely to host one consciousness? Um, the one unique physical universe, of which by definition there's only one, or some computer that's capable of running the experiences that we're having. If you can make millions upon millions of computers over millions of years of cosmic evolution, then the possible substrates for a consciousness that vastly outnumbers the unique one single physical universe. So, but just like if you open up the probability space, it raises the question like, how far does intelligence go? Because any possible like theoretical conclusion, any possible mathematics, like you start getting into basically the idea of an infinite mind. And if you're positing infinity, well, kind of with that you get an infinite mind, right?
I sort of, I guess so. I'm okay with that. Like it all depends on like when I'm saying like I don't believe in God. Usually, what I'm saying is I don't believe in like the biblical idea of God is what I mean by that. Theist idea of God. But like, when you're saying the way you describe it, or the way these old pagans described it, like I'm okay with some of those definitions. If you just say like all of existence, all, every thought is a thought of God, like it's kind of changing the definition of what I think of God, but like I'm more okay with a definition like that. Um, more of the pagan Greek philosophers viewpoint on it. So I'm
Well,
okay
yeah,
with that, and I find it interesting.
it's
What kind of
basically,
God do you believe in? Do you really believe in the God of the Bible?
well, as we discussed
You're on
last
mute.
time, I think part of the character of Yahweh
I don't hear you.
is. You don't hear me now? Okay, strange. Am I muted in? Oh yeah, I muted myself in the wrong window. That's my bad. Okay, so Adam can hear me now. Yeah, what was I saying? So, as we discussed in our last conversation, I think some elements of the character of Yahweh and the events in the Old Testament do depict the interaction of the ancient Hebrews with some kind of like malevolent spirit, um, similar to the idea of the Gnostic demiurge, similar to this Marcionite take, Gnostic take on the Old Testament. I'm sympathetic to that, but also like Jesus's teachings specifically, I think are extremely compatible with Platonism, and so I think basically the God of the Bible gets like reinterpreted to be the one, and Jesus is the one who does that in the Jewish tradition. I guess Philo realizes it first, and then Jesus kind of takes it all the way. Um, but yeah, I think that the God of the
You mean
Bible.
Philo recognized the logos? That's what you're saying? Is that what you're referring
Well,
to?
he was the first like well documented Platonist that thought of Jewish theology in Platonic terms.
Right.
And then the way it looks to me is Jesus was a Platonist too. And then like basically all the church fathers, if they leaned towards any philosophical school, it was going to be Platonism. So like the God of Thomas Aquinas is not that different from the God of Aristotle or Plato. And the same goes for most of the church fathers. So yeah, in that sense, I believe in the God of Christianity, Yahweh, the character of Yahweh from Genesis, etc. I think it's a mixed bag. There's some influence by necessity of the one, because the one influences all things. But beyond that, I think evil spirits are there, and I think the Jewish people, just like many other people, but maybe exceptionally so, have been influenced by evil spirits. I think it's not an uncommon thing. So that's a whole other like set of discussions we could have. Like, why should you believe in spirits like that, and what is meant by them?
So in the Bible, when it says like, "In God said this," do you agree that a God really spoke and said the words that are in the Bible?
Well,
Probably
God
not,
is
right?
eternal, right? God is eternal, and we are temporal. So we experience God through time. And God doesn't have a mouth, but we have mouths and ears. And so, insofar as we can receive something from an eternal, ineffable being, it's going to come through the modes of intelligibility that we're comfortable with and can perceive.
So you'll say like anything written down in the Bible is inspired by God because we're all the collective consciousness of God, something like that. So anything that I say is also coming from God.
Well, I
It's
think there
God
are
speaking.
degrees. I think there are degrees of inspiration. You know, like so. I think the best way to tackle that is like in a Platonic lens, where there are different levels of the soul, right? So we have the appetitive level that binds us to physical things, that kind of eros of desire for the physical world. And then above that, we have our spirited aspect, thumos, that gives us courage and the ability to regulate those appetites in the service of something higher. And then we have intellect broken down into like discursive reasoning and then intuition of forms. Because something like imagining, how does an axiom in geometry have necessity? you can't reason that out through time. There's a reason why mathematical reasoning terminates at a particular point. At a particular point, no stepwise logical argument will get you any further. A brute fact in metalogic or geometry is just a brute fact. Axioms are axioms. And then beyond that, we have something that goes beyond intellectual intuition, because what is intellect? It's a distinguishing faculty. We discriminate between essences. So one axiom is different from another axiom. Beauty is different from courage. They maybe mutually relate, but intellect discriminates essences, the natures of things. Beyond that, we have some kind of intuitive access into the unity that is shared in common between all essences, and different people will energize at different levels there. And the most divine level of inspiration is one where you're kind of unitively directed by intuitions of the highest. So another idea is that in Platonism, God, or even the forms, always give their benefits, just like math always offers its truth, and it's just up to us whether we turn towards it or not. So if we purify ourselves and turn that kind of highest aspect of ourselves towards the truth of unity, whatever it is, the ground of unity, then we will act more unified. We will be unifying for others, will, etc. So that kind of action is more divinely inspired, and that's, I think, also why like prophets, even in the Old Testament, would tend to be ascetic. And in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, that's ubiquitous. Like wise people have totally overcome appetite. They're beyond like the warrior virtues of spirited emotion. They're beyond like being an intellectual. They've ascended to contemplate the first principle of all things, perpetually, always meditate on, always pray to God. And then that gives them this like stable, abiding ground energy that then like the rest of their civilizations have been built on. So it's on a spectrum. Some people are more inspired than others.
I want to talk about Gnosticism since you brought that up, but I was just looking at some of the recent videos you did. Christianity, paganism, and Platonism with Joel Davis. That looks interesting. And also funny, why Jay Dyer banned me is the one from 3 years ago I saw. That's funny too. He's got me blocked too and is scared to debate. So you mentioned Gnosticism. Okay, I can understand how people could read the Old Testament and go, that God's fucked up. This world we live in seems like we're trapped. This looks like it was created by an evil God, right? We're trapped in these bodies in this evil, fallen, messed up world, right? So they would come up with ideas like that. I get that, but it seems so silly to me to think that there would be like a higher God, a higher, more powerful God above the satanic demiurge that created this world, that rules this world. Like what kind of all-powerful God would allow an evil God like the demiurge to be in charge of our world like that? Just that right there instantly sounds like bullshit to me. You feel that?
Yeah. So now we're a problem of evil territory. As far as why would there be a higher, more perfect divine intellect? Again, I think if you just say that reality is created by a kind of random number generator of universes and everything that can be is, well, you're going to have like the perfect intellect out of that. And a being like that would have powers greater than any other being. And if it has that kind of power, then, and it also has like the intellectual ability to empathize. I guess I'm kind of begging a question here that like more truly intelligent people would be more moral, because you realize the moral truth as well, and therefore you're going to want to pursue the good. But just for the sake of argument, we can assume that the most perfect intellect will also be the most perfect moral being, because it knows the perfect moral truth. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to care about fostering the good and offering the good. And if it is that kind of form of intellect, Well, actually, we are in contact with it because it is perfected and actualized what I am in a partial and imperfect way. And anything that I get to intellectually is something that it has already arrived at from eternity because it's just there as that perfect intellect. Even if it's in another world, it sort of doesn't matter which world it's in a similar way that like you could build the perfect Turing machine in a bunch of different universes, but it's one and the same design, one and the same like perfected version of this thing. So when it comes to minds or intellects, regardless of how many worlds it's converged upon, there's going to be one most perfect, most truthful, most moral mind, exactly one of them, and that thing is the source of all partial, imperfect intellect. So we already are interfacing with it.
When we talk about a perfect mind, that creates a problem in my head because as far as I'm aware, I've never seen any type of a mind or thinking being done without a physical brain.
Well, if you believe that the intelligibles, like mathematicals, subsist in a unitive way, then I think you believe they are mental entities that aren't contingent on the physical. So that's my view of
They're
that's my
there,
philosophy of
they're there, but if
mathematics.
there's not a physical brain to like think about them, then like they're I just don't see like our brains
You said it
only
yourself,
exist.
though.
What?
That you said it yourself that like, sorry to interrupt,
No, go
but
ahead.
like if the Earth were destroyed and our brains were destroyed, mathematics would still exist. So,
They would, yeah.
and I think the best theory of what mathematicals are is that they are intelligibles, they are mental entities, and they subsist together. And what is that but a mind?
So you're saying they can exist outside of our physical brains, right? That's what you're trying to say.
Sure, they
So
would
they
have
can
to.
exist without a brain then, is what you're saying. So why need a God brain for them to exist in? A God brain that's not a physical material.
Right. Well, because what I'm pointing to is kind of the bottom up convergence towards
As
a
far as I'm
type.
concerned, all thinking brain. Mhm.
Sorry, say again. You were
Sorry.
lagging.
Yeah, I know. You're cutting out every minute or so for a couple seconds. I don't know what the deal is. But I don't see any thinking being done without a physical brain. So why do we go, okay, well, these, logic and math exists outside of our brains. It exists outside of there, but nobody, if there's not a physical brain to actually think about it and go, okay, there's two apples and two apples, we got four apples. That's not being done without a physical brain to do it. So
Right.
if it exists outside of our physical brains, it could just exist, without a brain at all. So why go? Well, that can't exist unless there's a non-physical God brain for it to exist in. That's the
Yeah,
stretch that
yeah. I don't
I
mean to
I find is
suggest
unnecessary.
I don't mean to suggest that the perfect intellect has
Mhm.
a singular physical brain that's supporting it. It's a convergence argument where, so I'll just use the same analogy again. Like there's one perfect architecture that has an archetype of like the ideal computer, and we can converge to that, and it's substrate independent. You can build this perfect computer out of all sorts of different things. The archetype of it is eternal and has an existence from all time. Like the possibility of the ideal Turing machine was there before time began, so to speak. Um, so if intellect is like that, um, and it's interesting, you say like it requires a physical body to think through time. Um, I could almost agree with that. Like soul is necessary. Soul, which animates body, is necessary to think through time, because time is consubstantial with the physical cosmos. And so are souls. Like when you have soul, you have the cosmos, the world animal as well. But that's not the limit of mind. We also have that intuitive aspect of intellect, not the dianoetic or discursive step by step, but the unitive, intuitive, like, yeah, intuition of form. And so that is kind of what I'm pointing to. That's not contingent on a physical body. That's what any physical architecture that aimed at perfecting dianoia would eventually terminate in. the ideal intellectual act. It's an archetype outside of any particular timeline. And I'm saying that as you perfect intellect, you're going to converge on this archetype, which itself has an existence prior to all of those contingent particular timelines that, in a sense, may lead to it.
So do you think like do you believe in evolution?
I think it's a process. Yeah, I don't think it explains very much though, because like all of the laws that determine whether evolution takes place are there from eternity. So the time that evolution takes doesn't really explain what evolution generates. Evolution can be a description of a process, but the fact that that process takes place at all was already baked into the laws of the universe. Um, so I don't know how much evolution explains. I do think it happens.
Okay. So do you believe like our minds are evolving to be like a more perfect archetype of God's mind?
Um, yeah, arguably. So like Chardin, the Catholic philosopher, had that kind of view. So like many Catholics believe in evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Teilhard de Chardin, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that really badly, but he had this view that that was God's way of exercising his providence. He allows for a diversity of experiences and elevating all of these various forms and creatures through time, basically to like teach us the most lessons we can receive. So I think in general, yeah, the tendency has been over like cosmic evolution to increase intelligence. Sure.
I mean, I don't think you can dispute that we're peak intelligence of all life on Earth. So that's why we became so smart. We started to think about where we came from and how do we get here and where are we going. None of the other animals have high enough intelligence to do any of that. So that's why they go, we're made in the image of God, and I was just curious if that's what you
Sure.
did believe that our minds are getting, because when you explain like the supercomputer artificial intelligence getting better and better, I was wondering if you thought the same thing about our minds, which I don't completely rule out the idea of that. I mean, something's crazy going on. The fact grant you the fact that we're here at all with these these minds, and it's all so miraculous, for lack of a better term, that I find trying to figure these things out interesting. But again, what's with the idea that one of the hangups is like, if there really was a God, how come he makes it? Why is he hiding in a way? Because it does seem like he's hiding, right? In a lot of ways, like you look at the world, everything can be explained without a God. In fact, no God better explains the world that I see in the universe that we're in, and the reality of existence.
No, I think like the history of science and philosophy and spiritual practice do indicate the hidden God concept to be more likely. Because if there weren't this kind of hidden perfect intellect, hidden ideal spiritual path, then you wouldn't have different mathematicians in different cultures, different like gurus and saints in different cultures, all converging on these same truths. So like there's disagreement between different traditions, but there's also a lot of convergence on ethics, obviously on math and on metaphysics too. Like Platonism is not that different when it comes down to it from Hinduism. And of course, Christianity is based on Platonism, and Judaism also, in a way, is based on Platonism. So
I believe I just did a show with Gnostic Informant. You may be familiar with him. He's got a big
like
YouTube channel with Uber Boyo. Have you talked to him before? I imagine you would have.
I did once. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did a talk, and he's been doing a ton of research on how a lot of Bible Old Testament researchers are realizing how young actually the Septuagint. They believe that the Torah in the Old Testament was actually constructed like when it was translated into the Greek, or just shortly before, and that these are mythological stories that aren't really based in history, and that they almost created Judaism as as Plato's noble lie, based on Greek stuff. And it happened probably in Alexandria Egypt as well with the Greeks. So
Yeah, Russell
Judaism
Gmerkin.
is Platonic, and yeah, everybody seems to agree that Christianity also based on Middle Platonism.
Right. Yeah, Russell Gmerkin, I think, gives
Right.
the best arguments for that. There's a guy
Have you
on.
read his book or just seen his interviews?
I've read some of it. I like his
Uh-huh.
interviews though. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Besides
then
his
there's
voice, right? Doesn't he have the worst voice? It's so painful to listen to. He's like,
he's fine. All right. He's all right. And then there's Ammon, I think, on YouTube.
yeah,
I
Hillman.
don't know what to make of his arguments, linguistic
Yeah.
arguments. It's interesting though. He claims like the size of the vocabulary of ancient Hebrew was like 10 times smaller
Yeah.
than. Yeah.
He says it's like 8,000 words or something like that in Hebrew. So it's since it's
Compared to
more
like
simple,
200,000 in Greek.
right?
Right.
Doesn't he get you hyped on Greek? When I watch him, he just makes the Greek language and Greek culture seem so cool.
Yeah. Well, I am a like Hellenophile, so that's fine.
Based, better than a Judeophile.
They
I'll
were,
give you that.
yeah, they were probably the smartest people to ever live. Like I would say, average population, classical Athens may have been peak for humanity.
Have you read this one, Darkening Age?
No.
Have you heard about it? There's a lot of buzz going on around this book recently.
I might check it out. Is it
Dude,
on audiobook or no?
I don't think it's on audiobook yet, actually, but I'd still. It's worth a read. It's a good, easy read. Others, especially like John Chrysostom, like the favorite of all the Christian anti-Jewish Christians, he celebrates the destruction of classical Greek culture and their writings and their histories and stuff and their temples. It's so infuriating how they go, oh, Jews teaching us that we were worshiping demons and fallen angels, and only the Jews in Israel, they were the only ones that had the one true God, the understanding of God.
Yeah.
But anyway, I sidetracked.
Sure. No, that's good. It's an interesting topic, and I want to get more into late antiquity and the closing of like the school and Athens. Persecution of the pagan philosophers in general. It's pretty interesting. And then that and like Pseudo Dionysius, that time like 4th, 5th, 6th centuries CE or AD, I should say. It's a lot of good stuff. So, but we were talking about the problem of evil, and you were saying like God would have to kind of hide himself. Now, if you look at the Republic, Plato's idea of like the ideal form of government, the people who go through this system of training aren't made aware of how everything is structured and who's in charge of what until they themselves kind of climb through the hierarchy. And in fact, like that's kind of how life just works. Like you start with these little noble lies that your parents have to tell you because you can't understand the complexity of the world. So it's like heuristic simplification, that paradigm gets broken down in your mind. You move up to a next level of heuristics. And so we have these like simulation worlds that we live within, one after the other, gradually being, exposed to the broader world. And it may just be a fact of any developing consciousness. Like you can't unload all truth onto an infant. You have to do things gradually. And if you like just made it self-evident, like here is the governing structure of reality, here is what God is and how he governs, if it was just written into the stars for anyone to see, then it wouldn't give the same kind of impetus to philosophical investigation where you could have actual certainty about the existence of God. And it's better to know God with certainty than to take God's existence as a brute fact of nature. Because thought experiment, imagine that you live in a world where God literally signed his name into the stars. Undeniable, God exists.
And spoke from the clouds, a booming voice from the clouds in everybody's language that they could understand, right?
Everyone in that world would believe in God. Like it would never get questioned. But also, like, it's not necessarily the case that that is the cause of the booming voice, or that God really did make the signature in the stars. So it's always something that could be doubted. You could be tricked by some kind of daimon, some kind of demiurge in a world like that. So like the discerning philosopher, even in that world, with like obvious prima facie evidence, would still be justified in entertaining the possibility that he doesn't exist. And I think it's better for the development of philosophy in general that more people entertain those doubts actually and reevaluate their views so that we can hone in over time on more sure foundations for ethics, metaphysics, and ultimately theology so we can know God more fully.
Do you think that it's important to God that he believes we exist, that we believe he exists and understands him?
In a sense, yes, because that is better. So God being goodness itself, it is better for us to be closer to God. God being goodness himself, all instances of goodness are him in some sense. And so to pluralize, to manifest, to emanate himself further is to enlarge himself in some sense. And so our goodness is literally his goodness. So in that sense, yeah, he cares that
So,
we move closer
so
to him.
God wants us to to believe in him and to know him and know what he wants to a degree, right? So we agree there. And then God also knows exactly what it will take for every individual to believe in him. So why is he not giving everybody the information they need so they can believe in him if he wants to be believed in?
Well, I mean, we all do have all of the information necessary. Just most people haven't read the collected works of Plato or the Upanishads. Like it's all there. What more do you want? Like,
So God, well, I don't think it's all there because a lot of people aren't convinced of it. So God needs philosophers to explain him and state his case for him. Although he knows the best way, he could hypothetically have everybody know him, but he doesn't. He lets you guys figure it out on your own because we got our little human brains and we can't handle too much. Like we're like infants. He doesn't want to overwhelm us with his greatness. If I just believe well, here's another question too. Let me add this in. Do you believe that there's a punishment if you don't believe in God, like in the afterlife?
um, well, I think there are consequences for being mired in falsehood generally. So the more false your views are, the more or the less rational, less human in a sense, because to be human is to be rational. We're the rational animal. That's what distinguishes us.
Mhm.
So if you fail to live up to your humanity by getting mired down in false opinion, and you don't learn like true methods of dianoia or intellect, and you don't like energize with the one of your soul and ascend to like what you can be, then where does that place you? You're not actualizing to your full potential. And so that means the problems that you have to deal with don't have anything to do with these higher faculties. And so if God does actually give you the problems that you could reasonably face, because he's sensitive to your limitations, then okay, he gave you all these faculties, you didn't use them at all, you stuck to this very kind of animalistic existence. Well, then maybe it would be more efficient and better for you to deal with animal problems, and then you reincarnate as a horse or whatever, and deal with some more basic rudimentary kind of aspects of his law. um,
Mhm.
but then eventually you can move back up.
So I asked, is there like a consequence or a punishment when you die if you don't believe in God? It sounded like you kind of described consequences or implications for when you're alive if you don't believe in God.
Yeah, well, I was referring to the idea of reincarnation. So you would just
Okay.
move to an experience that was more attuned to your ability to solve problems. So if you don't ascend to the higher levels, then that means you're at a certain level, and God's going to give you problems that correspond to that level in your next birth. Now, as far as like, is there an intermediate realm where souls go and receive rewards and punishments, and have their own kind of in between journeys? I'm agnostic on that question. Plato definitely describes such things in his myths, but it's hard to tell where Plato meant it seriously or not. as well. So reincarnation, I do believe in, though.
Why? What convinced you of reincarnation?
Well, so using that many worlds argument, and I don't know if I want to get into all the specifics. One principle in Platonic philosophy is that form is real, matter is not quite real. So, what is real in things is their structure, not their substrate. Like the absolute substrate of form, matter itself, is inconceivable. We cannot imagine matter itself, except insofar as it provides a substrate for form. But even then, we're giving a kind of formal scheme of the form matter relation. And so that too is defined in formal terms, not genuinely material terms. So reality is, and only ever is, formal, informational. So if that's correct, and you have a multiverse, the fact of your like physical material existence is not as important as the presence of the forms that characterize you, the structure of your mind. And in this kind of exhaustive multiverse, you're going to have all of these possible paths your mind could go down. So as you approach death, you have in front of you this range of possible timelines, and the experience of a being going towards zero and a being coming out of zero. It's like some brain going towards death, or an embryo being fertilized, coming into cognition for the first time. You'll necessarily have some kind of overlap because they're both approaching zero. And so at that 0 point, ontologically speaking, all of the form that you need, which is the really real stuff, is there. And that's the only place your consciousness could possibly move to, because you can't experience nothing. And there's no reason why you can't continue down that other path. We think that events are contingent on physical location, but again, like the material aspect is not what's really real in things. It's the formal aspect. It's kind of a complex argument. I have a couple videos where I've given it an argument for the mind's immortality. Might be the most succinct.
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah.
Mind's immortality. Like, why do you believe that consciousness exists outside of a brain?
Well, in this argument specifically, I don't even have to posit that. It's so this is more like we should probably go to quantum mechanics. So in quantum mechanics, things don't exist when you're not interacting with them in one determinate physical location. They exist in a superposition of all of the possible trajectories that particle or entity in question might take on. So I think the future in general works that way. So like, what is the future that I'm connected to? Well, it's all of the possible paths that are open. There's a, so this is going to be a little bit tedious and a nerdy physics argument, but it's called the quantum immortality thought experiment. It was first written by Eugene Squires. It might be a pseudonym. He wrote like one popular physics book in the 80s, and it had that argument in it. Apparently, Hugh Everett, who authored the many worlds interpretation of quantum dynamics, also was aware of this implication of his theory. But the thought experiment goes, you have a gun with a radioactive trigger, and many worlds is true. So each time you pull the trigger, 50% of the universes you die, in 50% of the universes you live. So every time you pull the trigger, you're killing in countless versions of yourself in different timelines, but you as the consciousness can only ever follow the continued existence of your consciousness. And because of the nature of the many worlds, it's always ensured that there will be some you there to continue experiencing. That's the only thing you could ever you can't experience the world in which you aren't. You can only it's actually the same reasoning as your kind of anthropic solution to the fine-tuning argument. Because like, where would we find ourselves except in a world that was hospitable to us, well, where would we find ourselves in the thought experiment except in the worlds where we didn't blow our brains out? We could only experience those timelines where we continued. And I think that's a general principle. And because of the superabundance of form in this kind of multiverse context, it's precisely analogous. So there's always paths for consciousness to take, and they're always available. We can't follow the paths where we vanish, and so we're always going to stay, tuned into those worlds in which we exist. That's the
Hmm.
argument.
To bring it back to, as the Jews say, Gilgal is how they call reincarnation. Um, you believe that all souls, every living thing has a soul that reincarnates, or just humans?
Yeah, I think all consciousness goes through an infinite cycle. All
Mhm.
souls are eternal in some respect. They temporally energize or act, but
Mhm.
they all souls have eternal essences.
So I don't. I'm not convinced that souls are real. I feel like that all consciousness just comes from the material brains doing the thinking.
But then you have the same problem with the nature of mathematicals. Like mathematical things are impartible, mutualistically entailing, holistic, and physical bodies aren't that way. It's
Mhm.
kind of the same as the hard problem of consciousness, right? Like you have all of these neurons firing and synapses making connections, and we describe that at one phenomenological level like a neuroscientist would. But then at what point does that neurons firing transform into subjectively the experience of a rainbow or whatever? It's like that is not addressed in neuroscience. I think it's basically impossible to address. And it stems from a misconception in the first place of what is actually more epistemologically fundamental. Because in order to have the model of the neuroscientist looking at the synapses, we're already presupposing all of these mental properties that we have. So, like the way that a neuron looks, its color, all of that is filtered through our forms of cognition. And so our forms of cognition, consciousness itself, is presupposed whenever we think about any physical scenario, because we're the thing that's imagining it. Every physical property is actually mental. Like,
I don't think we're
you know,
imagining, like when we use technology to see synapses firing in a brain. I don't think we're presupposing and using our consciousness to judge that. Like I think that's just we're seeing the way that the cells in the brain interact with each other and work. But I didn't finish the point about the souls only existing or not existing, but what we call souls is just consciousness in physical brains. So if all all life, all consciousness has a soul that reincarnates, like does that mean there's a limited number of souls, on Earth, or what I believe, every new thing, that's born just has a brain, and then we call that a soul. If it's either that, unlimited souls, always regenerating minds, which we call souls, or there's a limited number, a finite number that just keep being recycled over and over again. So if you do think it's a finite recycled souls that are reincarnating over and over, then like what is that number? How many is there?
right. Well, that has to do with like the kind of philosophy of the finite and the infinite. So it kind of depends. I would say, in my own view, that the number is infinite from our vantage point, but not because it's from our vantage point. Um, as a soul that reasons dianoetically, we can never count the
Mhm.
actual infinite number. And maybe it's wrong to say that it's an actual infinity. Relative to our perspective, it's like a potentially infinite number of souls that will always be there, just like there's a potentially infinite amount of mathematical calculation that we could do. We can't have an actually infinite mathematical calculation from our perspective as a soul, but there's potentially infinite. From the vantage point of a higher thing like intellect, the number of souls would be finite in that all of the characteristics of like countable numericity are there pre-contained in intellect eternity. And so eternity intellect binds all number together and limits it, but not in the same sense that like 7 is a finite number because it stops after 7. So in a certain respect, the number of souls is finite. Relative to intellects,
Mhm.
the number of souls is finite. From our perspective, the number is potentially infinite. Um,
Here's another question I have with reincarnation. Like, say, do you believe the Earth is billions of years old and life's been around for like hundreds of millions of years?
sure, sure.
Okay. So let's just say hypothetically, many millions of years ago, there was way less brains on Earth, way less consciousness, so way less souls in existence, right? And then today, there's billions of people, billions of species, so there's many more souls, right? So is every soul always existed? Like in Judaism, they believe that there's 600,000 souls that come from their Platonic first man, basically the Adam Kadmon, the primal man, right? And that all of these 600,000 souls of the Jewish souls just keep reincarnating over and over again until they find their perfect match soul, right? So that's kind of, they came up with a finite number of souls, but I see it that it's like, is every soul that exists always on Earth, or is there like souls that are existing that aren't in a brain at one time? Like, just when you claim to think that reincarnation is real, like if you know that, then like you have to explain for all of these other questions that arise out of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think
Mhm.
souls move between different worlds. I think you could ascend, like
Like
Socrates
different
talks about in
dimensions?
Phaedo.
What do you mean by different worlds? Like not different planets, right? You mean like different.
No, I mean literally different planets in some cases.
Really?
Yeah, or
So
other
so you think
possible worlds.
you've been in another body on another world before?
Uh,
That's pretty cool.
I don't
I could get
remember it
behind that.
clearly. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, but Krypton. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
where it was. Um,
I'm an alien from another universe,
well,
trapped in
but
this body.
it's implied if you
Mhm.
have the same what I just kind of described, a many worlds where all these possible worlds are real, and then quantum immortality, where there's always, therefore, more paths for consciousness to take. And like the superabundance of all these mental experiences is guaranteed by the ontology that we assumed hypothetically in the first place to address fine tuning. So basically, I would say it's like a pincer move. Either you address fine tuning some other way, or if you accept this superabundance of possibilities, then we have all souls moving between various worlds and they're all immortal. So, and there's a God. It's one or the other.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting. I see the chat says paradoxes that arise when you have these concepts. Yeah, I mean it's stuff I thought about too. How many, if there is reincarnation, then how many souls are they? How many times are they reincarnated? Is every soul in a body at every given time? Because
Mm-hmm.
hypothetically, you can't have every soul in a body at every given. If souls last forever, right? Souls are eternal. Then at the very beginning of life on Earth, when there was only a few conscious beings, then all of these souls are where they're just in heaven with God, waiting for people to be born and evolve so they can go into brains. Like those are the type of problems that come up in my mind when I think of reincarnation.
Sure. I don't think it's a real
And
problem
also,
though.
can I
If you
ask
have
one
an
more thing too?
infinite number of bodies, infinite number of souls, well, they can just circulate, and they don't
Mhm.
all have to be on Earth forever.
Or there's no souls, and that every new living thing just has a mind, or the ones that do have minds, and we ascribe a soul to it. Like I feel like that's the
Well,
more plausible
but
explanation.
what is a
Less
soul?
questions,
What are we
less
talking
problems
about with a
come up.
soul? Is the question. So, like in Platonism, souls are mathematical structures. We are at the same level as the mathematicals. We are essentially discursive reasoning. we participate of intellect and oneness, and our bodies are structured by our dianoetic discursive activities. But what we essentially are is a kind of mathematical, logical thing. And just like all mathematical truth is inevitably there from the beginning of time, so all states of soul are inevitably there from the beginning of time. They're a real element of our ontology, just like our ontology should include and account for bodies, mathematicals, other universals like beauty, truth, goodness, redness, qualia. Like we need explanations for all these things in our experience. Well, what we are doing as conscious agents, making decisions, making judgments about the world, there are only so many ways we can do this. There's a phase space of consciousness, and there are possible kind of mental constitutions and impossible mental constitutions. And so all the possible mental constitutions, those are eternal structures, just like possible mathematical truth is an eternal structure that's always there. So that's what a soul is. And if you lack that, then you can't address the mind body problem and or the hard problem of consciousness.
I've read stuff about like a hierarchy of beings, a hierarchy of souls, like humans at the top, and then animals, and then plants, and then like minerals, right? And going down and down, more basic building blocks, right? So, do you believe that if a human, has bad karma, does bad things in the world, hurts other people, they're gonna, when they die, our souls are gonna reincarnate as like a lower being, like you're gonna be an animal or something?
Yes.
Or if you are a good person, does it matter on like your acts in the world, how you behaved, or is it dependent upon if you believed in God or not? Like, are you punished? Is your soul punished in the next life if you don't believe in God? That's the question.
Yeah, I think the disposition of your soul is changed by your acts. So what you do will impact how your mental state is. And ultimately, it comes down to what is your constitution. Because God, providence, this we haven't argued for yet, but if God is good, he's going to providentially attend all things. So the idea is that God gives us exactly those problems that meet our constitution and meet what we can handle. So if we degrade the level of our soul by sinning against truth, beauty, goodness, or by like turning our backs on the idea of God, because God is part of truth in this, world that we're hypothetical world we're talking about. Well, then the constitution of your soul is just going to be at a lower level, and that providentially attendant God will have to give you problems that are at a lower level to correspond. So if you don't believe in God, you will be punished in the sense that you're not going to be born with the same capacities for goodness. Because obviously, if you ascend, there are possible lives that can become like less brutish, nasty, and short, more civilized, more elevated. I mean, presumably, it's more enjoyable for us with our lives where we contemplate our existence than for a fly that lives for 2 days, a fruit fly. So yeah, if you expand your horizons and focus on truth, I think bigger picture problems, more like sociality, more love, more goodness, etc., is going to characterize the problems of that God gives you, and vice versa. So that's the sense in which we're punished, but it's really never a true punishment. And in the same sense that like you punish your child in hopes that they will improve, so then God would punish us in hopes that we would improve.
And one last question before we wrap up on the reincarnation ideas. Say Aarvoll's total Chad, loves beauty, loves honor, believes in the right platonic God. You're gonna die. You're gonna reincarnate. What is the highest level of reincarnation? And say there is like great awakening and everybody's enlightened and everybody totally gets it. Like, what is the direction that the reincarnation is heading in?
The
Like, what's
Avatar.
the Avatar? Okay,
Yeah. The
explain that.
one perfect man incarnate. So
And
we
what
all
would that look
terminate.
like?
What's up?
What would that look like?
I like to imagine. So Jesus says, like, you can do the things I do. Um, I. What would Jesus do? Like, the idea is to emulate and make ourselves more like him. Um, so if that was the ultimate terminus of reincarnation, like the highest level you could attain to, then once you got to that level, I mean, presumably there would be more orderly worlds where you were prepared for that life. So, like, you ascend out of uh, an earthly life with a rarefied intellect, like, you get to heaven where there are angels, beings that have lived for thousands or millions of years, and they have all this wisdom and they can prove it to you. It's not like you don't take stuff on faith anymore. Like, everything is explicitly taught and explained. And so you gradually improve yourself in those worlds until you're like beyond what we think of as the human level. And then you would have the choice because, well, in Hinduism, what characterizes the avatar is voluntary descent for the betterment of lower beings. So you would make the choice once you got to a certain level to voluntarily descend and take up your cross and do precisely what Jesus did, or Krishna, or whoever.
Hmm.
So
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. I gotta say, this is not topics that I ever get into on my show. So these philosophical, atheist, theism conversations, reincarnation conversations, not stuff I've put a whole lot of thought into. In the topics I focus on.
well,
But
I
it's
mean, I thought
interesting
you
to talk
had
about.
good
I
responses,
think it's
good
cool. I
thoughts.
think it's cool all the research you've done into these ideas.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. Research that I've done.
Unless you were just born, you're a lowered, ascended master that's came down to us to lift up my soul.
Yeah, possible. Again, I don't have a firm recollection of Krypton,
Did
but
you come from another planet?
yeah. So I'm trying to fix the audio issues. I know have like been kind of intermittent throughout the stream. I
You're
don't
saying I
have
have an
my
echo.
mic doesn't work anymore that I usually use, so I had to like
Mhm.
manually mute the whole time. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, no, I figured that you would be like open minded to talk about this stuff. I thought we had a good conversation, good responses, good challenges to all these points. I think maybe we all learned something. So if anyone wants to ask a question, you want to take like a few questions and then wrap up.
Sure. I have to go. Honestly, I have to go to the bathroom really bad.
Okay, well, you go ahead and do that, and
I
then
woke up minutes. Oh, you want? Okay, I'll go and come back.
sure,
That's
yeah,
what I do. Okay, I'll be
sure.
back in a minute.
All right. So thoughts you'd hear Guatam, thoughts on ancient advanced civilization? Well, according to this theory, like all possible civilizations sort of have existed. There's soul time, and then there's physical time. So, like when Adam asked, "Do I believe that the Earth has been here for billions of years?" It's like, well, yeah, in some sense it has, but also in a more real sense, Earth as the form of Earth is eternal and has been here countless ages, and countless great civilizations have risen and fallen. As far as like physical Earth and physical time, um, yeah, I do think uh, ancient advanced civilizations may have been a thing. Um, I've obviously advocated for the Atlantis theory, but I don't think they were technologically that sophisticated. I'm interested in not Joseph Campbell, Joseph Farrell's arguments on this. He goes for a paleo ancient, hyper advanced civilization, but also I'm not sure how much of his stuff is really just a noble lie as well. Um, so I think, where the evidence mostly leads, and I think an influential civilization existed in the late Ice Age out of the Azores Islands. I think genetic traces are there. I think technological traces are concordant with it, consistent with it. Um, but I have videos on the Atlantis stuff if you want to get into that. And let's see. If anyone has a question, especially for Adam, make sure to @ me in the chat. Scrower, I think. Thoughts on turn your cheek, love your enemy? I think loving your enemy actually helps in defeating them because love is bound up with compassion. Compassion, empathy is bound up with understanding. And so if you allow yourself to love your enemy for what they are, that means you'll understand them better than they understand you if they hate you. Hatred clouds judgment, love allows you to remain firm. True love, not like passion. I don't think you should be erotically attached to your enemies, but you should love them for what they are so that you understand them, so that you can defeat them. And then turning your cheek, I think, obviously has its limits. And like God, in a certain respect, himself doesn't always turn the cheek. Like when we turn away from God, when we sin against God, we do receive punishments. And when we're in positions of authority, we should mete out punishments as well. I think it can easily be misinterpreted, and maybe that's an issue of the particular texts that have come down and our treatments of them. I think we all know Adam's thoughts on that, and there's something to it. So he asks, like, thoughts on turn your cheek, love your enemy. I was trying to apologize for those views, but at face value, they can obviously be pretty destructive. So, what are your thoughts there?
They could be destructive, but the idea of like, I see positives and negatives of the idea of loving your enemy. Like you can have compassion for an enemy, go like, okay, that guy's evil. He's done evil things to me, but he was abused as a kid. He's had a really tough life. So like I have sympathy with him. I have sympathized with him, and I'm not going to let my enemy like drag me down because I just I want what's best for him, like that kind of idea. There could be positives to that, but you could take it to like a self-destructive level too, where it's just like, oh, I'm a slave and I'm beaten and I'm not going to fight back, I'm just going to pray for him. So there's a middle ground there, but I do see the wisdom in forgiving people. Sometimes could be beneficial for yourself to not hold grudges and to like understand like I've wronged people before, and but then I really deserve to be forgiven as well. So I had a thought for a question for you. Is there more questions, super
There
chats
are,
as
but
well? But
yeah, go ahead. Sure.
so we're talking about like reincarnation, souls, the ego. We mentioned Hillman too, Amen Hillman, the Greek scholar. His book is about like the muse of drugs, right? Influencing all of these ideas. So I'm wondering, what do you think of psychedelic drugs and helping people, you know, comprehend some of these ideas? Or maybe this is where these ideas originated from. So what's your take on drugs in this conversation?
Yeah, it's dangerous territory, obviously. Like people go crazy because of even usually beneficial drugs. Um, in the past, there were ritual contexts in which drug consumption was acceptable, but you had to prepare yourself for that. Like, I do believe the Eleusinian mysteries involved
Mhm.
some kind of psychedelic or potential. Like people have theories that it was like the gases let out of the volcano up there. I think some kind of drug use in one form or another was involved, but it was like a years long process of initiation to get to that point where you're going to make the necessary connections out of the experience. And also, it's a controlled setting. You're not going to like hurt yourself. They are technologies in a certain sense that can be used for good, but it's when they're unregulated, it's much more likely that they'll be used not for good. And
Mhm.
people are just generally like too addicted to drugs in our
Mhm.
society. So I want my stance to be basically against drug use. because most people can't handle it. But
Yeah.
in the right ritual context, maybe it can help some people.
So in the right ritualistic context, drugs like mushrooms, I guess we could say, could help you discover like these hidden truths of God in the universe, in ourselves and our souls. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been my experience. So yeah.
Hmm. Me too. I agree. And it's like God made these. Did God make these things for a reason? So you can understand God? I feel like, honestly, that I may get some hate for this, but I feel like people having experiences with certain chemicals in the universe help our brains understand a hypothetical God more than the Bible ever could, and it's not even close.
Well, I mean, direct experience is more powerful, but again, it's like the initiation process really starts from when you're a child. And we need stories and lessons for every phase of development. So I tend to be, we need all paths, not just the one.
Mhm.
Okay, so Abail asks you, Adam, will Trump go through with Armageddon?
I think he would. I think they've given him a messiah complex, and they've convinced him that he's the savior of Israel. So if Israel is under a big threat, he will. I'm sure he would do. He do, including getting us into a nuclear war.
More likely than Kamala?
Oh yeah. Look at Trump's ego, and look at Trump's savior complex, and look at his he's like a loose handle. Look at his tweets. Who has more erratic tweets? If you just judge on the tweets and the statements of Trump or Biden or Kamala alone, who I think it's pretty obvious who'd be more likely to press the button. Or just to run his mouth and get us, somebody else to press the button first.
Okay, interesting. Have you shared who you're planning on voting for, if at all?
I'm in California, so it's almost a guarantee that my vote for president won't matter at all. But I want to be. I want. I feel like it's not even a choice, really. It's like we have one option, and you can just hope for the best or hope for the worst with that option.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
A bunch of people have asked about free will and determinism. Somebody asked about that in the multiverse. I think free will only really makes sense with the multiverse because if there's only one timeline and the others aren't real, then what meaningful choice did you have? So I think what is unaccounted for in quantum mechanics is the particular collapse of a particular wave function. And I do think, this is a typical kind of new age move to connect the collapse of the wave function with consciousness or free will. But I think that's what free will is. It's the mathematical, let me rephrase that, mathematical completeness of the world requires something to be there to join those possibilities at every point. So, like free will, the act of decision is kind of constitutive of these various paths. Because if you don't have that, then the question of like, okay, why does this happen rather than that happen when both are equally mathematically possible never gets answered. And so that's one of the essential things about souls. So souls are mathematical beings. They are essentially agents, so they make that difference and make that decision. And then the other thing is that they are musical. So they're like harmonies, mathematical structures, and also moral agents. And I think it works better in a many worlds context. But do you believe in free will?
We have, obviously, if there was no God, then we would have free will, right? Or some would argue, no, you have. There is no such thing as libertarian free will. Depending on your circumstances and your nurturing and your genetics, everybody will choose a certain path depending on all those factors. But most of the time, we hear free will, evil, and they go, "Well, there has to be evil in the world, and bad things happen because it's free will." And but I don't think we have the free will to choose whether there's no choice if you believe in God and Jesus or not. It's not a choice. You either just believe it or you don't. You can't, I couldn't choose to believe in Christianity, right? It's not a choice. You either believe it or you don't. Do I choose whether what I'm going to do when this stream ends, if I'm going to go get some food or make another coffee or go to the gym? Like, that's a choice. Decisions we make, but I can't choose, even if I wanted to believe in Jesus, and believe in heaven and hell. If I don't really believe it, I can't choose to believe it. So in that sense, where we mostly hear about free will, I completely disagree with it.
Yeah, I think maybe belief involves some element of free will, but really what it comes down to is what do you choose to do? What do you choose to go through as far as arguments and reading, and like how do you form your worldview? Like all the choice is in the process of coming to the belief, the actual having of the belief itself, like in an instant, just accepting that this is true. Like that's just lazy reasoning. That's like failing to actually think through everything. But yeah, the free will is in what you do to get to that point.
Like
Like
which books you choose to read
hmm
makes you come to the conclusion which you have no choice over. Like, I see what you're saying there. Yeah.
Okay, so um, we could probably go ahead and wrap up pretty quick here. My connection's starting to fail, or it has intermittently. So yeah, this was enjoyable. Thanks everybody for showing up and watching. I know there's a lot of new people from Adam's audience, so welcome everyone here. This is more the kind of discussion that I enjoy, like very abstract philosophical stuff. But I'm interested in the historical question as well, and I'd like to talk to some of the people Adam has spoken with, like Gnostic Informant, on the historicity question, like more in depth. And I think Adam is just like really well researched, actually. Maybe a bit biased in the sources that he's looked to compared to other possible sources, but he's done the work, and I always respect that. So much respect for Adam, regardless of disagreements. But yeah, any last words for the audience?
Yeah, when it comes to the Jesus question, because that's what I focus on mostly, is, Jesus is a prophecy deception. He began as a myth. It's a deception to theologically conquer the nations. That's basically what I talk about most on my channel. And I have read both sources. I've read this book. I highly suggest everybody gets it, On the Historicity of Jesus. It's like an 800 page book. Incredible information on that side. His adversary, Bart Ehrman, wrote "Did Jesus Exist?" I've read both of these books many times, and it's I'm left with no choice, no free will, that Carrier is in the right here, and Ehrman's coping and has terrible arguments. So I would suggest everybody one thing. You can watch my videos, the Jesus Deception playlist on Odyssey, but if you haven't read this book on the historicity of Jesus, like, you're severely uninformed on the Jesus question. And if we ever do a talk again, maybe we can get deep into the Jesus hoax. I'll have you on even to talk about the Jesus hoax if you're interested.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I would like to get deeper into it. Historical questions, it's sort of all contingent. Like, we can have a theory of what happened. In my view, like, well, there are multiple possibilities. And I didn't talk about this with you, but like, I think the past also, just like the future, is open and all the possibilities are real. I think the past is open and the possible pasts are all real. So that would take some time to get into, but it's not as pressing a question to me in light of that philosophical view.
Yeah.
So
Note that one down. We can talk about that one next time. How the past is not is open to be changed, apparently. Well, we don't
not
know
fixed.
necessarily what happened in the past, so it could be multiple possibilities.
Exactly right.
Mhm.
But yeah, this has been fun. Thanks everyone.